Go for it.
All right, then let's start going down the agenda. We've got a meeting scheduled tomorrow to do the monthly updates for the various project groups. We've made pings and several of them have gotten back to us.
Yep.
Then please take a look at any action items that aren't done or just aren't marked as done. And then let's go on to the pending proposals. I'm assuming, Nico, since you have an update right there, that you want to say something about this eager drop values?
No, I want to say that I'm still haven't done this yet, but I expect to do it in a week or two, as I've been saying for a while, but it will be true.
Fair enough. All right, and then we have a few RFCs open.
Yeah.
So
one of my action items was to, which I also didn't expect to get to this week anyway, was to improve the script. But for now, I figured we can just manually page over here.
Fair enough. We you've got listed there that there aren't any nominated RFCs, and then are there any of these that people want to talk about, or do people just want to check boxes asynchronously?
As a procedural note, I do note that there are a couple that are blocked on boats in some sense. I don't know if we should sort of do something about that.
Yeah, usually we just check those.
Well, so actually, so one of them actually has an outstanding concern. And
okay, so the UI is just terrible.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I see some of them have only one. They have concerns registered by boats, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it a concern from boats, or did boats register a concern on someone else's behalf?
The former.
Okay. In a few cases, I've seen the latter. That's why I was asking.
Sounds like we should read it and make a judgment, and you can always cancel the FCP and restart it. Maybe we should, can someone take an action item to like go through and nominate things on here that seem like they need to be discussed?
Right.
Okay, so calling generic methods on generic parameters of const buttons is definitely one.
Yeah.
Does that one have a concern or just an unchecked box?
I believe it has an unchecked box and a concern.
Okay.
I'm happy to do a quick pass over the RFCs.
Okay.
Nominate or
that would be great.
Action.
Yeah, let's do that.
Is there a concern on 2845 super trade item shadowing as well? Or just unchecked boxes?
I feel like I might have registered a concern on that.
I seem to recall concerns.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I haven't done yet, but yeah, okay. I have some mild concern about this, but it's sort of like, it's just changing. It's making something significant that wasn't supposed to be significant before, the set of bounds that you write, and that will affect the implementation. I'm not sure that I think it's problematic from a user experience point of view, though. Like it makes a difference between an elaborated bound and, anyway, I should write it in a comment. I'll put an action item for myself. Or Mark, can you make an action item for Nico to write a comment on
sure.
RFC 2845? Thanks.
Also, 84988 is, I marked that as nominated, but I'm not seeing it show. Oh, no, it did show up in the list down under PRs, just was buried. So I may bubble that one up a little higher to make sure we get to it in this meeting.
All right. Should we move on now, though? If Mark's
Yes.
going to go over, we'll come back to it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Then there are no nominated RFCs. There's no P-high issues or nominated reference issues. So let's go on to our list of nominated PRs. We have the tracking.
Sorry. It's not nominated, but the keyword, the lexical reservations RFC. Do we have anything we need to talk about what the details of what that's semantics are supposed to be? I saw there was a bunch of Zulip conversation about it.
That may be worth bringing up, yes. There was some discussion about consistency, and in particular consistency with the current behavior of the R-hash lexing. The original proposal effectively said put a space on either or both sides of the hash in order to avoid the reservation, and that we were only reserving token, hash, some other symbol with very specific syntax there. But R hash, even with a space after it, is not currently allowed. And there was some discussion asynchronously on Zulip about the idea that token hash space should still not lex, on the theory that that would reserve anything starting with token hash. And then we could decide how we wanted to lex that in the future. Alternatively, we could allow that and decide now that that lexes. The only advantage of allowing that to lex would be if a macro found it onerous to insert a space on both sides or the left side, but wanted to insert a space on the right side only in order to tokenize something. So that doesn't necessarily seem worthwhile, but what do other people think? There's currently a proposal to tweak the reservation to just prohibit token hash in general.
This is true, Josh. We have no known examples where anybody actually cares about this, right?
Correct. The one example we had where anybody cared about token hash something with no space was the format string macro proposal. And I don't know of any example where somebody cares about token hash space something.
I think we might as well just be consistent. There was this other point as well after this is done, though. That's maybe worth just about the API. It was more of a libs question, but not exactly.
Okay. We can talk about that one then, but if nobody has any objections about this item, or rather, if you have any objections, there's a Zulip thread going on the edition channel to discuss this. So please go ahead and make it known there if you have a concern.
I always like well, we can make it work later if we want.
Exactly. The only question is whether we would be breaking something that people care to have keep working in the next edition, and I don't think we are. Okay, so concretely, can someone take an action item to report this consensus to the appropriate Zulip thread and say that we discussed it today and nobody had any objections?
Sure, I can take that.
Thanks,
Since you
Scott.
brought it up.
The other issue
That
that
should
was
help that sunblock. Yeah.
there
Go ahead,
was-
Nico.
There was the, what's it called? 2 tokens. Here it is. This is it. So I don't think there's necessarily much to do here, but I wanted to make folks aware of it. So there's this API from stir from token stream. And the problem is this just takes a string and doesn't have any way to say what. So let me link to this. It doesn't have any way to indicate the addition from which this string or with which this string should be parsed. There is the current behavior of the library. I think it will use the addition of the invocation site of the procedural macro, if I'm not mistaken, which is relevant for, well, which is not that relevant until we make changes, I guess, because it wasn't really relevant before. But that was, maybe it was, I can't remember.
It seems like that's the right behavior, but we should just deprecate the function.
I think that's right. I think it's a decent choice, but the function is flawed because it's not always the right choice.
Right. You shouldn't have to make that choice.
Right.
Yeah, ideally we would pass into the procedural macro, here is the addition on at which you were invoked, and then it could choose to pass that addition through to a from stir function, but could also choose to pick an arbitrary addition if it wants. But this behavior seems like a good default.
I would have expected it to take a span as an argument.
Yeah, that's what I would expect too.
That works as well. That sounds even better, yeah.
It's a trait impl, so you can't. We can
Right,
create a new function, but
Well, it shouldn't.
Right, what I'm saying is I would expect that trait impl to just not exist.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
The problem, the one interesting sort of gotcha here is that many existing users of this function are procedural macros that wind up being, for some reason or another, invoked by a macro rules macro defined in another crate. And I think that layer of indirection,
oh dear Lord,
kind of messes up the reason this is a decent choice is that you get, you would imagine that if you're taking tokens that the user gave to you, you're getting the user's addition. That's kind of what you wanted. But if you do that indirection, you're actually getting the addition of the crate which introduced the indirection, which may or may not be the crate that supplied those tokens. So luckily this is like, a pretty small, like it only affects this rhash stuff, right? So it's probably a case where we're gonna have some weird addition migration behavior, but it's pretty small.
Some of the discussion on that issue
to clarify, oh sorry, go ahead.
Raised that potentially the whole idea of addition dependent lexing is maybe not a great idea, but I don't know whether we care.
Yeah, I mean that is the question. But I like, why not? This is the main reason why not, because we didn't design the API with it in mind. I don't know. I didn't think there was another argument. But
don't we already have addition-specific lexing insofar as we have things that are keywords in 2018 and not in 2015?
That's addition-specific parsing, not lexing.
Sorry, addition-specific what?
That is an example of addition-specific parsing. The addition-specific lexing is a different thing because it depends on whether or not things want separate tokens or not.
So we don't determine whether something is an identifier or a keyword at lexing time?
Well,
that's my, oh, go ahead.
The thing is, the compiler internally does have some stuff, but the token stream API for procedural macros does not.
Okay.
And even in macro rules, you can take something that you said is a colon ident and pass struct or union and use it as a keyword to declare a struct and things. So
yeah,
the whole idea of what's a keyword lexically is a little funky. It's true.
Yeah, we don't, I thought the same thing, Josh, but I think we don't, we did intentionally design the token stream parsing to sort of be very generic. On the other hand, like, I don't know.
Yeah, for what it's worth,
okay.
Petroshenkov definitely says that the design of the Lexer library and the fact that it's shared with Rust Analyzer and so forth, like, like the current design of the compiler very intentionally sort of avoids introducing any global data, including the addition. And so we can say, well, whatever, that's just implementation. Obviously, it can be changed, but I do think it is sort of potentially worth considering, especially because I think Crater returned that maybe there's not too much.
Right. Right. The result might be that we want to just do this across all editions and not make it edition dependent, I guess.
That is what we decided for K-hash, for example.
The impact of which would be that K-hash things and R-hash things now get parsed as a single token and are given to macros as a single token rather than as separate tokens or a single token depending on addition.
It would make them errors.
I'm sorry.
It would actually make them errors today until we give them a defined, at least the way we wrote it.
Oh, so they just don't lex.
Yeah, today, under the way the RFC was written to maximize forward compatibility.
Well, that seems great then. We can just fix this then, right?
Oh,
Well,
but they
that's
lex
part of the
now.
problem is they lex today, and there are a few macros out there counting on that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. You're saying that going forwards in future editions, they wouldn't lex.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry, I had that backwards.
Yeah, we did determine from a crater run that K-hash will not break any existing code, and so we can make K-hash for keyword usage be reserved in all editions and always turn into a keyword, which is ideal. It means we don't have to come up with some unusual R hash dollar or something for old editions. But we did run into conflicts when we tried to do the general syntax reservation.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I mean, the original reason to put additions in cargo toml, for example, was precisely so that we could have lexing dependent and parser dependent stuff where we didn't have to, we sort of knew from the beginning what the addition was.
In an ideal world, like proc macro, it would be nice if you had to declare a version of that, like actually write a dependency, because unlike std, it wouldn't be the end of the world if proc macro had a major rev to drop an API.
Well,
I don't think that solves this.
I feel like you would want, with regard to this problem, I feel like the ideal is to know what span it came from, and thus know what lexing rules to apply.
Right. I feel like the real problem here is just that people shouldn't be creating token streams from raw strings. Like, we just shouldn't have
Yeah.
an API.
It's not a good thing. It's mostly
That's
a
fair.
hack in practice.
That
Can we
was
just
my
make
point. Yeah.
like, I know we can't, but like I would like to.
Well, we could at least deprecate that. We can't remove it, but we can deprecate it.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Isn't
about the
it like
question of
the way
different-
things are written, though? Like, I don't know. Token streams from raw strings seems like the sort of easy way to write proc macros in some sense.
No, it's token streams from raw strings and a span. And if you just want to specify span, call site or span def site everywhere, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's true.
But then you're opting into some behavior.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
guess we could deprecate this and say fromster is always edition 2018,
But it wouldn't.
and then nothing breaks, right?
I guess that doesn't avoid the issue of that you still have edition dependent lexing. So if
Right.
your goal is not having edition dependent lexing at all, that doesn't actually help.
Yeah, I think
right?
that's the interesting question is, should we, like the procedural macros are definitely, it's definitely a nice simplifying thing if the lexer is just behaves how it behaves. And that's that.
Yeah, it's also nice for stuff like code highlighting and stuff in various places. And I think some of the work that I've been doing on reduction also enjoys the fact that you can sort of lex Rust code independent of knowing anything about it.
Yeah, I can see that, although it's
all solvable
quite
problems.
cornery. Yeah, but it's nicer if you don't have to.
Yeah, like outside of a macro invocation, it's still completely doable, right? It's only in places where you're stuck, not really knowing what's going on. Well, I guess no, because string literals and pair and matching. Blah.
Yeah, although I guess the set of IDEs that one, do something more than regex parsing for lexing, and two, do something that couldn't relatively easily be edition dependent, I think is small or non-existent. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
So I have a silly question. What do we do for R hash for all this stuff? Is that kept as part of the token, or?
Sorry, what?
R hash async in these APIs,
I
does it
see.
just give you a token that is still R hash async?
I'm not sure about that specific case, but in terms of R hash handling in the compiler in general, we have quite a few places where we sort of guess, depending on various factors, whether the thing is a raw identifier, or it was actually written as async in a previous edition, and we just sort of running on the guess we insert the R hash or not when party printing, for example.
I think there's I thought the token carried that information, but
We don't always, right, but we don't
Yeah.
always have like
right. Hmm.
Well, I don't think we're going to solve the API version of the problem in this meeting. I think the only question is, does anybody feel like there's a fatal flaw with doing edition dependent lexing that is worth hashing out right now, no pun intended? Or
Yeah.
if not, then we may want to take it async to discuss what the right API for that would look like, because as far as I can tell, proc macro doesn't currently have that API.
Do we think it's worth surveying like users of existing tools to see if, like, in what ways they would be impacted by edition dependent lexing?
Yeah.
Users of or tool developers?
Sorry, tool developers.
I think it makes sense to get some folks' opinions.
Like
I don't know.
I at least would want like Matt Cloud or someone to weigh
Right.
in and like maybe
It's a
I don't know,
comparatively
maybe
small list,
say-
so it seems feasible.
Right. Yeah, it seems useful to gather a little data.
I would be happy to write up a comment on the issue that sparked this discussion, 84979, asking Pedrochenkov, Matclad, and I guess that's about all I can think of, sort of off the top of my head, for
Sure.
sort of a discussion
Yeah.
of why we don't want this state in the Lexer beyond just sort of, it's not there now. Maybe we don't want to introduce extra stuff.
Sure.
So would there be is there a easy sort of thing that we could ask at or talk about at a higher level of like, if we don't do edition dependent lexing, how could we ever introduce new tokens?
Find lexical forms that currently don't lex.
Right, there's just not very many of those, and they seem
Identifier starting with
Sort of
numbers, I guess, maybe.
bad enough that
Well,
But yeah,
yeah.
I don't know.
like rather than the specific, do we really want this for this
So-
particular thing, is like if we ever wanted to do F strings or whatever, or would we just be saying, well, no, we've decided we have to do these as syntax forever and they can never be lexical? Or
I think I'm trying to remember how I think that the procedural macros work by white space hacks, right? It's plausible to me, at least, to imagine a sort of parser library level that introduces new interpretations of older tokens, but yeah, I don't know. I think it is kind of hard to introduce new tokens if you don't do addition dependent lexing.
Right. I would also, as a procedural note, I would observe we should ask tool developers to elaborate on the potential downsides of edition-dependent lexing, but I would also observe the default there seems likely to be this will make things more difficult, and the question is more it's a trade-off rather than a full, if they're not thinking we should do it, then we should consider that feedback rather than that we should treat that as a veto.
I actually would definitely trust at least Matt Cloud to give an honest response about like whether more difficult means like we have an extra if statement in two places or like a match statement somewhere versus like this, destroys laziness or something in some critical way, right?
Sure.
Like,
no, I completely agree. I think that we could get some good feedback in that regard. I think I'm just suggesting I would want to know what the trade-off is. And I agree that Matt Cloud is very likely to give us the trade-offs there.
It's also true that like we discovered the K hash foo has no real impact. We could explore the alternatives are to we could reserve all ident hash ident, for example, and across
Sure.
all editions, just break it since it's not supposed to break anything. We haven't tested that. You only tested k hash, I think, but we could test that.
No, we did actually test everything first, and that's why we narrowed the crater to just K-hash. The initial crater run picked up on things like the macros that do F strings. We should
That's
go
not-
back and double check if there was anything that was caused by
think
ident hash rather than ident quote, but
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Well, where can someone find that link at some point? And that's another action item, I guess.
I believe that may be 84037.
Okay.
That may have not been the correct item.
That doesn't seem right, but it's okay. Let's do it offline.
Yeah, offline. So let's, if anybody has anything to add on this, then please speak now. And otherwise, I think we should move on to the next item.
Okay.
And as a standing reminder, this is an item that is desired for the edition. So if we're going to make any changes to it, this is already very late for that.
Yeah.
That was not meant to suggest we should do it wrong for time pressure reasons, but rather if there is substantial new design that someone wants to do, then it would need to happen in a hurry.
Yeah. I think, yeah. That's right.
So nominated PRs and issues. We have the tracking issue for RFC 2345, allow panicking in constants. It looks like the nomination was actually moved to 85-194.
Yeah, I moved it there. This is a stabilization issue that I created. I think the current status, there's been some discussion. You can see it here. And it's kind of waiting for one of us to FCP merge or do something else.
Seems reasonable. I would love to have static assert.
I think I'll have to go double check. The one issue that was raised, which doesn't bother me, but it's a thing, is if we ever allowed catching panics in constants, then people might catch panics. So if you were using them to signal some kind of thing that should definitely abort compilation, it might not work. Seems like, okay. I don't know. I feel like I would just document that you should be aware of that and move on. I don't remember if there were other major issues, but I would be okay to take an action item to FTP merge.
Yeah, I know that I at least had brought up, I haven't had time to follow up on the thread too much, but there was some discussion around sort of, my impression is that currently Ralph at least feels that panics should always sort of abort compilation, or at least like that's the current implemented behavior. And I do think it's interesting to contrast this with what we recently discussed with the to-do macro and unused warnings and stuff, where like it does seem potentially helpful to have some way of saying, you know, I have a constant, maybe it's not being used or it's used, but like I don't care about its value. I just don't want to implement the function for now. And it's interesting that sort of, you know, there could be a concern there, I guess.
I see. You're talking about the idea of like const something equals to do.
Essentially, yeah. Basically, like, you know, this will eventually be a string, but it, you know, the computation is hard, and I don't want to implement it for now.
Yeah.
And you know, if we stabilize, then potentially there's people relying on the fact that those are not. But
I'd like to get.
Well, if we ever stabilize never type, then you could do const foo of something equals never.
Like,
could you?
Well,
I'm not
equals loop.
sure. There you go, equals loop.
Good old everybody loops.
No, that'll take the compiler a little while to get upset with you. But I think, like, I'd like that's at least I guess that is a concrete use case. But I also feel like in that case, you could just write like this. You could just write this, get your compilation error, and move on with your life until you're ready to fix it, right? But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's sort of always true that you can not use to do and use, or at least most of the time it's true. You can always produce some sort of dummy value, but it's not always trivial. And
yeah,
yeah,
I feel like that doesn't. Well, okay, we should have that discussion out, but it doesn't persuade me too much. I mean, the utility of panic is pretty high, so
Right. I think it would be reasonable to have a way to specify so I would like to phrase it slightly differently. I think that the thing that you're proposing that would have a not yet defined constant would be useful, and I think maybe we should have a proposal for that. I don't think that should be a blocker for being able to panic in a constant.
yeah, that might well be. I think that it is worth noting that, with the concern with catching panics, maybe the thing that, to some extent could be desirable is some sort of like const panic that does actually guarantee a compilation abort. But that, has its own complexity. So, I don't object to stabilizing.
yeah, I'd like to know an example of someone who would catch. Like, first of all, we don't catch panics yet, but I don't think there's any concrete example of like a panic that would be caught in where it's reasonable to do so, and an error where you would be upset that the panic got caught.
I feel like all the good examples of catching panics don't apply at compile time.
Right.
Because all those quote unquote panics at compile time are already caught in the same sort of sense of like, oh, I don't want the different requests interrupting each other. All of the const panics are caught by the compiler conceptually and
Right.
don't interrupt the rest of compilation or anything. So
I could imagine someone writing like a complex function inside of the value of a const and throwing a panic and then higher up catching the panic. And the rule could simply be, we will error out if your panic bubbles up to the level of being the value of the constant, as opposed to being caught while you haven't yet finished evaluating the constant. That would be forward compatible with this proposal, I think.
Right. I think that's the obvious semantics. And then the question is just
Right.
like, would somebody be upset about, like, would that be a problem?
I guess
Right.
that goes back to the, well, we can have a macro that is, if you run this is like a panic at runtime, but it's a hard compilation error that can't be caught at. It's const abort, I
we can make
guess.
sys exit.
There you go. That's actually a great thought.
Yeah. Okay. Well, does someone want to take is there any concrete, move here? Somebody could move to merge or enumerate the concerns, or
I think I
Yes.
still have an action item to propose merge, so.
okay. Let's move
Yep.
on.
Okay, I was
That's
going to take
accurate.
it if you hadn't.
Yeah, Scott's action item stands.
With
Okay.
the, if all this conversation is resolved to, yeah, it's okay, let's do it, then I'll propose merge.
And Mark, do you want to take an action item to write up a separate proposal for what you're proposing for being able to do?
I don't think I care about it that much.
Okay, then.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. I think it's worth it. So
I meant that as a question, not as a
Yeah, no,
suggestion.
for sure.
So, okay. All right, then I think let's move on to the next item. And in the meantime, when Scott files the FCP on that, then people have more boxes to check. So next up, we have tracking issue for unsizing casts in const FNs. There's an
basically
FCP
just waiting
pending
on
on
FCP here,
85078.
unless there's any reason. I think we can move on.
No, I don't think so. I can unnominate.
That'd be good.
Oh, I see. This one is marked to FCP, and actually it has entered its final comment period 7 days ago. So
Yeah. Similarly, I don't think there's any real updates here unless there was some lib discussion. This is the buggy point.
I think the only thing is whether we care to keep checking in. I think that it is potentially reasonable that we just unnominate unless there's further activity, which I think the loose next step here from my perspective is that, there's a libs discussion, potentially some PRs are filed, and once those casts are added, the lint would likely be sort of in a better place to recommend the casts in more cases, and we could come
Actually,
back
the
to it.
libs discussion did happen, and I can give the very brief summary there. The response from libs was that we are very amenable to getting proposals for concrete functions that serve specific subsets of as, and it would be fine to have those proposed individually, and it would also be nice if somebody had a more comprehensive list of here are the uses of as, and we'd like to propose functions for almost all of those. But that isn't a blocker. It's more of a nice to have, and we would take patches for individual functions for portions of as they are today.
Sure. Yeah, I just meant not that discussion, but the actual, proposal for specific functions. And then once those functions exist, then a Lang discussion or
Right.
whatever can happen to say, we're deprecating this bit of as in favor of this set of functions.
This sounds
Right.
like to me, this sounds like a project group.
I think it
don't-
is.
I think we should close this and say we would entertain a project proposal with the goal of deprecating as, and this rough
Right.
outline, because it's a unit of work that needs to be sort of chased.
And then
It does
giving them
seem
the
like-
summary that libs is amenable to taking PRs to add those functions, and that Lang is amenable to taking a lint proposal when
Right.
it has concrete functions to recommend rather than as X as Y.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point is I'm fine with people adding those functions piecemeal, but I would, in terms of deprecating as, that's a language change in my view, and I would like to see it done in conjunction with when we know the full set of functions or a reasonable set of functions exist.
Also, as a caveat there, I don't know that we'd want to position that as deprecating as, because
I
one
guess it's
possible
just limiting as potentially.
Right, exactly. One bit of feedback from the libs team was that as is really convenient for short, pithy code. And so it would be nice if it were limited to reasonably safe cases that did not lose information rather than getting rid of it entirely.
Yeah, no, I take back what I said. I do think a project group would be fine, but I also think, I'm trying to think how I would like to document our intention to do this, and it would be fine by my view. That seems like a good quest issue too, right? Of there's some work to write out the set of things to be done, and then there's a set of PRs to add those APIs and deprecate those slices of as. And they don't have to all happen at once. They can happen.
It does sound like a potentially
by
good
piece.
fit for a design note, basically saying that,
Yeah,
we discussed, here's the loose state, but maybe, there's not actually someone who is willing to drive,
right.
but also, maybe there is, and they literally copy paste the design note essentially into a project proposal and say, I want to do this.
Yeah, I like that. I think we should have a sort of, it's not a pre-approved proposal, but it's a suggested proposal.
Yeah, I sort of feel like this isn't quite as holistic in design necessity as I feel like a project group is sort of more focused on that, adding individual APIs for this is a particular use might be sufficient to sort of do it as it goes along.
Yeah.
And then it's
Well,
up
I
to
think that
libs
there's
to
a-
make sure that those APIs are all logical and coherent and make
I'm bas-
sense.
I'm
I
basically
actually think there's
imagining,
value in a project group doing the design work to figure out what seems they should carve along to provide orthogonal functions for uses of as.
yeah. I can see it too. I could see us if we do it piecemeal. I'm kind of okay either way, but I could see that doing it piecemeal winds up with inconsistent names and just sort of strange coverage that could have been nicer.
If nothing else, having a project group, even if they don't write the code themselves, it would be helpful if someone else wanted to shepherd the proposed items into the language and like go solicit patches. Either way, I don't think we have the bandwidth to do so.
I guess my sort of thought here is that, like, if someone just went and wrote a libs RFC with all of these things, then it wouldn't really need a project group, because it would,
Yeah, that's fine.
like, once the API is defined, you write a PR and
This is fair.
I'd be
like,
okay
it
with an
exists.
RFC. It could go straight to RFC.
Yeah, we could note that like if you want to do this as a project group and do it incrementally, or if you want to do it as an RFC and propose a comprehensive change all at once, either way is okay.
And I sort of feel like a lot of the hard part here is that libs side of what is the right way to represent all of these things? Are there traits for them? Is it extensible? How do consistent names look, etc. And once all that has happened, the sort of Lang side of this of, hey, we can write lints that recommend you call those library functions is not very exciting. It's good, and I would like to have it, but
I agree.
it's not a Lang team complicated design question.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Okay, so let's write up that. So meeting consensus. I think we should close this PR personally. Because we've kind of concluded we don't want it as is right now, right? What we want to suggest is, so close the PR, suggest adding APIs to carve to the standard lib for these sorts of casts per libsteam process. Right. Ideally do this comprehensively, but this is a libsteam approval question. And then once APIs exist, lints are welcome.
Okay. I would be happy to take the action item to write this up, since I can do so with both Lang and libs hats on.
I would say do it. I would also like you to, if you don't mind, to copy and paste that into a design note in the Lang team repo.
Sure. I think the structure for a design note would be slightly different than the structure of a comment, but yes, I could try to put a design note together as well.
Yeah, just try something. I feel like we should have, this should be documented somewhere that's not like a comment on a PR
Sure.
that was
No,
closed.
I think that's sensible.
So
I can take both of those action items, sure.
okay, great.
All right. Let's move on to stabilizing range from patterns. This is 83918. As the summary notes here, we have a complete FCP, but we also have a comment noting that there's a unfortunate ambiguity where people may expect something to work differently, either based on experience with other languages or just based on logical semantics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like we discussed this when we stabilized ... though.
Yeah, I also think we did. I don't. I could see people being confused, but I also like when you do know what it means, there's no other. I guess the question is, did you mean there's like a typo potential, right? Where you meant this, but you wound up getting this weird thing, but then you're going to get type errors. It just seems kind of unlikely that this will actually compile and successfully pattern match when it's not what you wanted.
So I agree. On the other hand, it seems so unlikely to be what you wanted.
No, I take that back. I take back what I said. I keep forgetting that this, like, because this would match an array of integers and so would this. So
right, yeah. It seems so unlikely to be what you want that it seems reasonable we could take Beastry's suggestion here to not allow the specific case of integer ranges, and then it would be trivial to say unless you parenthesize them or similar. Like if what you mean is really I want to match a one element array that has a number 0 or greater in it, you could write that this way.
yeah, it doesn't seem that unlikely to me, but I do see the value of requiring you to be sure. It
Is
feels
this
like a lint.
is this a parse? That's what I was about to say. Is this a parser error or is this a lint?
I don't think it's a hard error. I think it's a warn by default lint. This is probably not what, this may not have been what you wanted. Use a parenthesis if it is what you wanted. And
feels like
we
a
would
lint to
only
me.
need to lint here, I think, on single element cases, because if what you write is something like this,
I mean, if you're matching a
If-
single element, I feel like we should say if you want to match a single element, extract the single element and then match on it. But
well, that would be a 2-level match, though. It
Yeah,
is
why would you do that?
convenient to do.
Yeah, sorry. I
Yeah,
agree with
I-
I agree with Josh. I'd want parens.
Yeah, I think that requiring parens here to avoid the ambiguity is not unreasonable, since people seem very likely to assume that this might be something else.
I'm persuaded by lint for single element. Like the single element, that's a pretty crucial observation.
yeah,
That makes it very much lint to me.
Right. I will say I do commonly wish to use slice patterns because I'm matching a slice and I want to say for the single element case, do this. But the idea of combining that with a range, I think having to use a parenthesis there seems like what I would want to write anyway.
yeah, it feels like the frequency at which you'd have to add these extra parens is low enough that I don't feel bad about them.
Okay, so I think our consensus is we would like to request a lint for the single element case.
A warn by default lint concretely.
Does this need to block the PR?
Yeah, so FCP stands. I don't think it blocks the PR. Maybe we can open an issue. That's what I would do.
Or we
Seems
could
like a
ask
good
B-Street to open an
E-help
issue.
wanted.
Yeah, this would likely be a good like first issue for somebody delving into compiler lints.
Yeah, somebody will close this in a day if we open it.
Okay. Does
Who will
somebody
do
want to
this?
take the item to open the issue, or do we want to suggest to B-Street to open the issue?
I think maybe a good next step is to say, I can leave a comment basically saying that, we discussed this. We think that a warn by default lint for the single element case addresses this concern. Maybe if you agree, please file an issue suggesting a lint for that case. We would be happy to, see it implemented and approve it.
Yeah, that seems okay.
Sounds fine.
And that
Wanted
also
to-
leaves it open to, maybe they disagree and say, actually, you completely misread my concern.
Sure, right.
This is insufficient.
He can, yeah. If he feels that way, he can make the case.
Okay, I think that addresses 83918 unless anybody has anything to add. Okay, then moving on to 84988, we discussed
Mark, are
this
you taking that action item?
Yes.
Sorry.
No problem. So we discussed 84988 previously, but there was a follow-up here. So this is proposed for merge to make target feature safe on WebAssembly. And there are 3 outstanding checkboxes on it. But in particular, I wanted to follow up because Ralph raised a concern and then Alex addressed that concern. It sounded like the question was, would LLVM ever do optimizations on the basis of you're calling a function that has a different target feature? And I think it's fairly self-evident, and Alex is making the case that like LLVM can't make that assumption. That's a Rust-specific assumption that for Rust safety purposes, LLVM absolutely allows you to call a function with a different target feature after you've checked that you have that target feature. So I don't think that that concern is something that we need to block on, but please feel free to take a look at Alex's most recent comment from 2 hours ago and see if that addresses anything. And then we're looking, I think, for, well, I think only one person in this meeting has the checkbox still unchecked, and then Taylor and Felix are not here. But Nico, if you want to take a look at that.
Yeah. I remember feeling vaguely weird about this. It's like, what's the motivation is again? I mean, I know that like
motivation
you
for this
can't
is that
have
those
more than
things-
one instruction set on WebAssembly.
Right. Well, or even if you could, it would not be unsafe to call. The premise is that we have this unsafe on platforms like x86 because there are legitimate cases where old processors misinterpret new instructions and could do arbitrary undefined behavior that will never apply on WebAssembly. Even if there were a mechanism for differing instruction sets, there would be validation of like either it understands it or it doesn't, but it won't do undefined behavior.
So
Is
one
this
thing
is
that
just
it,
saying if your target is specific to WASM, if you use target feature with a WASM target,
Right, exactly. It would only be unsafe to call target feature if you're not on a WASM target.
I see. So if you're on a WASM target and if you're targeting WASM and the target feature is for WASM, there's some WASM target feature, then it's okay.
Right.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
And the premise for this is wanting to make WASM's intrinsics not unsafe, or rather the ones that don't have to do with things like raw pointers. There are still intrinsics that will be unsafe because they touch raw pointers, for example, but regular like math intrinsics, SIMD intrinsics, etc., should not be unsafe.
Right. I have a question then, which is, seems related to our discussion about ABIs. Like, why do you have those target features in the first place? And why is there more than one kind of? And we know that the WASM spec is evolving. And so are we just not concerned about like, I'm targeting WASM 1.0, or we expect sort of some other semiver to play that role? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. So we do, I think that is the rationale for having target features on WASM, is that you may not wish to require a new WASM interpreter that understands SIMD, for example. And so this note here is not actually the case. There are WASM features that are not understood by some WASM targets. However, they will not misinterpret them. They will do validation and they'll say, oh, I don't understand that, so you don't get to run at all. So you can never break an old WASM interpreter, but you can prevent yourself from running on an old WASM interpreter. And you may wish to not call a function with a target feature if that's the property that if you want to run on an older interpreter.
So one of the things, so I have my box checked, but I wanted to, there was one thing that came up that I thought was interesting, is the whole target feature 1.1 discussion, because people want
Right.
this for non-WASM too, like the target feature SSE on x64 wouldn't have to be unsafe either, hypothetically.
Well, that's interesting. So I think those are two different things. There's target feature 1.1 where you should be able to safely call a function that requires like AVX in a function that already has required AVX. Then separately, there is, should you be able to safely call a function that requires SSE on a platform that always makes SSE mandatory? Like on x86-64, you always have SSE and SSE2. I don't think that's target feature 1.1. I'm not sure there even is an SSE and SSE2 target feature available on x86-64, but
Sure. I'm just thinking now, didn't we decide recently, we sort of decided we wanted to avoid target specific errors and stuff like that.
Target
Right.
features are already target specific, so you can't ever use them in non-target specific code. So it's kind of
Yeah, okay.
Right. We don't need a portability lint here. You already know you're not being portable if you write target feature.
Well, if you
there's no
call it-
namespacing or anything. So it's literally if you're not doing some sort of config by the target or only compiling for one target, you're almost certainly doing it wrong.
Okay.
Right.
So
All right. I'm convinced.
to your comment there, Josh, I assume there is a target feature SSE, or pick one that actually works, because I'm not very good at remembering target features on x86. And then
Right.
that one's just always. So what happens if you have one of those target features and you're compiling for a x64 target?
I don't know if it necessarily even compiles, but if it does, then it should probably just be ignored. Like you always have SSE and SSE2 on x86 64. So if it even allowed you to write target feature SSE, then it should just be a no op.
Okay, and that's different
But I
from the
think-
WASM case, because WASM, you don't necessarily have the target feature in your target.
Right.
It's just
That-
safe
yeah.
to call it because it won't be UB. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
That
I
explains
think
the
those are
difference to me.
You also raised a point on the issue, which I think is worth reiterating here, which is like a lot of things are safe-ish in WebAssembly in that they don't have undefined behavior, but we still don't necessarily want to make them safe. Like we don't make raw pointer intrinsics safe on WebAssembly, even though you can't actually cause UB by invoking them. You can just go scribble on things. But that isn't the same thing here. This is more the underlying reason we had to make it unsafe just doesn't apply.
Yeah,
So
I
we'll
would
still
also
have
argue
unsafe
like
intrinsics on WASM, just not this.
I would also argue that is still undefined behavior, just with a somewhat narrower scope. Like it can't.
Yeah, it's Rust abstract machine undefined behavior.
Exactly. Right.
In the same way that Ralph has written 17 blog posts now about no, what the machine does isn't what Rust does.
Right. All right. I have to drop another call, but we'll move on. Thanks all. Is there an action item here as me check my box? Okay, I'll just do that. Thank you.
Well, also Felix and Taylor.
Sure, but they're not here.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
All right, thanks all.
Bye.